Guidance on the use of non-pharmacological interventions. The use of the PBS arousal graph. In this animation, we want to help you to better target your non-drug interventions in order to manage situations in which people living with dementia have become stressed, distressed, or highly agitated. We will present a helpful graph called the Positive Behavioural Support Graph to clarify the nature of distress behaviours. Here we're talking about behaviours such as shouting, walking excessively, repetitive questioning, kicking doors, or hitting out whilst receiving assistance with personal care, etc. Such behaviours may show increasing levels of arousal, discomfort and agitation, which carers need to deal with in a person-centred manner. During this animation, we will present ideas on de-escalation techniques and interventions involving person-centred hand-holding and restraint. In this context, restraint is seen as any touching of someone else's body, no matter how gently, that prevents the person moving that part of their body. So, for example, during the recent COVID-19 vaccination program, when we gently held someone's hand to keep their arm still while they were receiving a needle, our actions towards them at that point would technically be regarded as a form of restraint. We feel that caregivers need to be aware of the full range of interventions available to them, from simple verbal persuasion to physical prevention. This is because when caring for people living with dementia, their actions may sometimes be extremely risky for either themselves or others. So we, as caregivers, may need to take actions in their best interest. And at such times, it is helpful to have a toolbox of strategies up our sleeves, which we feel both confident and competent to use. So let's consider the following graph, the PBS arousal graph. When we examine this graph, we can see that a rise in the height of the line indicates higher levels of arousal, whereas along the horizontal axis, we are indicating the running of time. The graph shows a behaviour that is starting from a very low level of arousal, which is then quickly escalating to an extreme level, before dropping down into a slightly depressed state and then returning to a state of well-being. Let's look a bit more closely at this graph. A more accurate understanding of people's stress and distress would see each behaviour as a series of phases rather than a single action. Often in the past, we have mistakenly described behaviours simply in terms of problems, using single words such as shouting, hitting, swearing, or unhelpful phrases such as kicking off, etc. However, a more useful and accurate way to see them is shown in our graph. This graph is used a lot in a clinical approach called positive behavioural support. The diagram suggests that heightened distress does not occur out of the blue, but tends to follow a sequence with changing levels of arousal. Low levels of arousal are found in the well-being phase, when the person is content. This is the green line in our graph. However, following a triggering event, the person may move into the escalation phase, the yellow line. And if the person's agitation grows, they will enter the fight or flight response. Here we may see the person living with dementia displaying extreme distress or agitation, the red line. On rare occasions, the person may even display physical aggression due to frustration or misinterpretation of situations. In the later stage of the graph, as the level of arousal subsides, the person enters the calming or blue phase. As indicated by the trough, there may even be a dip in the person's arousal after the event has finished. This may happen due to them becoming emotionally and physically exhausted. If this situation is left untreated, over time, the person may become low or even depressed. Hence, after such events, carers need to work hard to get the person back to a state of well-being. Note that this can be exhausting for the carers, as they are having to work through all these different levels of emotional arousal, occasionally with potential risks to themselves, and then at the end of the activity, once again, the carers are required to focus on the well-being of the person. So you can see why this may leave the carers feeling exhausted. Let's now look at some of the interventions. As well as showing the progression of distress behaviours, our graph is a helpful guide for our choice of interventions, enabling us to link our actions to the level of arousal being displayed by the person. For example, to maintain the person in the green phase, we need to employ preventative strategies to promote the person's well-being. This would involve many of the therapies we commonly associate with good dementia care, such as music therapy, exercise, aromatherapy, doll therapy, therapeutic touch, etc. While engaging in these therapies, we have to ensure we're meeting the person's needs, such as ensuring they feel safe, free from pain and discomfort, respected, in control, occupied, and are having fun. Please see our previous animation on delivering therapies to meet people's needs. If the person with dementia enters the yellow phase, their arousal and behaviour will start to escalate, and at this stage we will need to adopt interventions that help reduce their increasing levels of emotion and arousal. Some of the strategies typically used to de-escalate difficult situations are finding any causes or triggers of the distress and then removing them, including dealing with issues to do with pain or discomfort. We could also allow the person to express their needs and identify any immediate triggers for their frustration. We could use good verbal or non-verbal communication, employing expressions of concern and active listening techniques, and if appropriate, possibly use humour or banter. We could establish a relationship and make sure the person feels respected and valued. We could offer them alternative ways of getting their needs met and helping the person use a different way to express their need or frustration. If the agitation is caused by a carer's presence, for example, by a carer saying no to something, it may be possible just to back off, thereby avoiding any confrontation. Our final strategy is to remember the importance of personal space, and hence give people sufficient space to calm themselves down. Note that for some people the use of a doll or music may also be beneficial here. The best strategy will always depend on the individual needs of the person, so an appreciation of the person's history is essential, which is often best identified by means of a formulation or some form of comprehensive care plan. We also recognise that psychotropic medication might be used in this phase. However, its use alone should not be considered as the only de-escalation strategy to attempt, and one must weigh up the cost and benefits in terms of potential side effects when using drugs. In those situations when the person enters the red phase, where we see high levels of distress and arousal, we'll need to start to employ the next group of strategies, such as handholds and person-centered restraint techniques. These are required to keep both the person safe as well as ensuring the safety of those around them. In this context, restraint covers the full range of physical restrictions. Hence see our second diagram. So as we can see, this can be the use of basic hand-holding techniques, but also covers techniques such as the physical skills taught within Prevention and Management of Violence and Aggression (PMVA) courses. Restraint covers a whole range of physical actions, particularly if one considers actions undertaken on the left side of our diagram. This means that the issue of restraint is relevant to all settings in which people are being supported with their personal care. The issue of restrictive practices and restraint are emotive issues and can raise difficult issues and feelings for carers. Their use should always be discussed openly with families and any clinicians or staff involved in the person's care. This is to enable careful and collaborative decision making as to whether this type of last resort strategy is needed to be used in a person's best interest. It is important to highlight with all interventions with people living with dementia, the most effective strategies are delivered by taking account of the person's history, preferences, and needs. Therefore, because everyone is different, the features that trigger and maintain behaviours are also different. Hence, it is still important to conduct ABC charts and produce formulations alongside the graph. A good formulation will greatly improve the targeting of the interventions chosen at each of the phases. The current animation is one of the educational tools in the CATE program. Thank you for watching.